My son handed me a moving box in the middle of my own 80th birthday party. "Time to downsize, Mom," he said, smiling like he'd just given me a gift. Then his phone rang, and by the time he hung up, he wasn't smiling anymore. "My name is Dorothy Reyes. I am 80 years old, and this is the story of the birthday my family tried to turn into an eviction notice with a bow on it. Welcome to Grandma Never Forgets. My son Marcus organized my 80th birthday himself this year, which should have been my first warning, because Marcus has never organized so much as his own sock drawer without his wife Sandra's fingerprints all over the plan. 20-some relatives crowded into my backyard on a warm Saturday in June, a rented tent, a sheet cake with my name spelled wrong, and somewhere in the middle of all that noise and cake, Marcus walked up to me holding a flattened cardboard moving box tied with a ribbon, like it was something to be excited about. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said, loud enough for the whole party to hear. "We think it's time to talk seriously about downsizing." Sandra found the perfect little apartment near us, and we thought, what better day to start this next chapter than today? I want you to understand what it feels like to be handed a symbol of your own displacement in front of 20 people holding paper plates, all of them suddenly very interested in their potato salad instead of looking at your face. I held that ribboned box in my hands for a long moment, and I felt something in me go very still and very clear, the way it does when you finally understand a thing you'd been quietly suspecting for months. I should back up because this moment didn't come from nowhere. My husband Arturo passed 4 years ago, and I've lived alone since in the house we bought in 1985, a modest ranch on Delacroix Street that I have kept exactly as he left it, his tools still hanging in the garage, the way he organized them, his rose bushes still blooming every spring because I learned to prune them myself the year after he died rather than let them go wild. Marcus and Sandra live 20 minutes away with their 2 boys. And over the past year, Sandra in particular had developed a habit of describing my house in front of me as a lot of upkeep for someone your age, always with a tone that suggested concern rather than the calculation I'd slowly started to suspect was underneath it. What none of them knew, standing in that backyard with cake on their plates, was that I had spent the previous winter quietly working with my daughter Isabel, who lives out of state and has always understood me better than her brother does, to put a very specific plan in place. Isabel is an estate attorney, and over 3 phone calls in January, she helped me establish something called a life estate on my house, a legal arrangement guaranteeing that no matter what anyone else in this family decided about my future, I retained an unconditional, legally enforceable right to live in that house for as long as I chose to, full stop, with the property passing to my children only after my death or my own voluntary decision to leave. Isabel filed the paperwork with the county in February. I told no one else, not because I was hiding something shameful, but because I had learned slowly and painfully over the years since Arturo died that some protections only work if they're already in place before anyone gets tempted to test them. Marcus's phone rang about 90 seconds after he handed me that box, right there in the middle of his own little speech, and I watched his face change as he answered it and heard Isabel's voice on the other end. Isabel, it turned out, had been quietly watching the group chat where Sandra had, weeks earlier, shared listings for that perfect little apartment, entirely unaware that Isabel was still on that chat from Christmas and had never bothered to leave it. Isabel had done exactly what I would have expected from her, which was nothing dramatic, nothing public, simply a calm, precise phone call to her brother the moment she realized what was actually being planned, informing him that their mother's legal right to remain in her own home was already a matter of county record, and that any further pressure toward downsizing would be documented beginning with today's birthday party as an attempt to displace an elderly homeowner against her will. Marcus stood in the middle of his own party, phone pressed to his ear, going pale in a way I hadn't seen since he was 9 years old, and broke my china cabinet playing indoor football. "Isabel," he said, quietly enough that only a few of us nearby could hear. We weren't trying to force anything. Sandra just thought. I watched him trail off, unable to finish a sentence that had sounded so reasonable in his own kitchen, and sounded considerably less reasonable now that his sister was reciting county filing numbers back to him in front of his mother's birthday cake. Sandra, to her credit at least, had the decency to go quiet rather than argue further in front of the guests. But I saw her face too, in that moment, and what I saw wasn't embarrassment so much as recalculation. The particular look of someone who has just learned their plan has a flaw they hadn't accounted for, and is already quietly trying to figure out their next move. I did not make a scene. I set the ribbon box down on the gift table next to the actual presents, and I told my family calmly that I would very much like to enjoy the rest of my birthday, and that we could discuss my living arrangements if anyone still felt the need to at a time and place of my own choosing, not sprung on me in front of 20 guests holding cake forks. The party continued awkwardly, the way parties do after something true has been said out loud that everyone would rather pretend they didn't hear. I opened presents. I blew out 80 candles, or the token 8 the bakery had actually managed to fit on the cake. But something had shifted in that backyard, and everyone there knew it. Marcus came to see me alone 3 days later, sitting at my kitchen table the way he used to when he was in trouble as a boy, quiet and fidgety, in the specific way of a grown man, working up the nerve to apologize properly. "I didn't know Isabel had done all that, Mom," he said. "I didn't ask you what you wanted before I let Sandra plan all this." I told him that was, in fact, precisely the problem, that he had spent months letting his wife narrate a future for me without once sitting across from me himself and asking what I actually wanted for the years I had left in this house. "What do you want, Mom?" he finally asked, and I don't think he'd asked me that question, really asked it, in longer than either of us wanted to admit. I told him the truth. I want to stay in this house in Arturo's garden for as long as my body lets me manage it, and when that day comes, I want to be the one who decides what comes next, not have it decided for me over cake at my own birthday party. Sandra and I have had our own conversations since then, tenser than the one with Marcus, but honest in its own way. She admitted eventually that some of her urgency came from genuine worry about me living alone, and some of it came from simply wanting more space for her own growing family, and that she'd let those two motives blur together in a way that wasn't fair to either of us. I told her worry is a reasonable thing to feel, and a poor excuse for skipping the conversation where you actually ask the person you're worried about what they need. Isabel flew in for a visit last month, the first time in over a year, and the two of us spent a Saturday afternoon in Arturo's garden, replanting the roses that had gotten a little wild despite my best efforts. She told me she was proud of how I'd handled that birthday party, standing there with a moving box in my hands and not giving anyone the satisfaction of watching me fall apart. I told her I learned that particular skill from her father, who never once raised his voice in 40 years of marriage and never once needed to, because he always made sure the ground under his feet was solid before anyone tried to move it. That is my story. One ribboned moving box, one life estate filed quietly in a county office months in advance, and an old woman who learned that the safest birthday gift you can ever give yourself is making sure nobody can hand you your own eviction notice and call it a party favor. If your family has ever made a decision about your future without including you in the room, This is your sign to have that harder conversation before someone hands you a box instead. Drop a comment and tell me how you've protected your own independence as you've gotten older. Subscribe to Grandma Never Forgets, and I will see you in the next one.